Hello everyone, this is Dev Days Europe 2023. It's our second day and we're moving next with Joseph Guadagno. He's a Senior Director of Engineering at Rocket Mortgage right now and he serves on .NET Foundation Board of Directors and he's been MVP for more than 13 years. Today, Joseph will demonstrate the key Azure services that can make our application reliable, scalable, and performant. Joey, what do you love about Azure?
I think the best thing about it is that there's so many options to choose from. And they probably have something to fit every niche that you may have within your application, from strange databases to blob storage to content delivery networks, API management. They have it all.
Please share with us more.
Hi, so my name is Joe Guadagno. Like we just said, we're going to be talking about scaling your application using Azure. So before we get started, a couple of things I wanted to cover. You can reach out to me on any one of these means at jguadagno. I'm pretty active on Twitter as well as Facebook and LinkedIn. If you want to find out articles about me, you can go to jjg.me/aboutjjg. GitHub repo for a lot of these samples and also other videos and presentations at my YouTube channel. I'll pop this up again as we get to the end. The agenda, we're going to take basically a .NET application that you can download. It's called the eShop on Web that shows a lot of best practices for .NET. And I'll show you how you can take that application and make it available in Azure and handle true scale with it. So this is going to be our architecture overview. We're going to start off with an Azure SQL database. Then we're going to take that and we're going to create a blob storage to share our images. We're then going to expose those blobs or those images via CDN. And then we're going to create a web app that uses Azure Web Services to deploy to, which will give us the ability to see the app. So enough about that. Let's go and start coding. Let's get a review for a minute. So this is our application. It is a mock e-commerce application that basically allows you to buy some .NET merchandise. So as I hit play, give it a second or two, it's going to spin up and show you the app. So there's a database behind the scenes where the product catalog sits, as well as an image repository. Right now, the image repository is local on the machine. So we see things like this hoodie here or this cup, and apparently it's time for upgrading my machine, and other images. So we're going to take these images and throw them in a what's called blob storage in Azure, and then we're going to serve them up on a CDN, and everything that's in here, all the data, we're going to store in a database. So let's go and stop this for a while. And while that's going, let's head over to Azure. So at first, I'm going to go and create a Azure resource group. And the reason why I create an Azure resource group is because I like to kind of categorize all my applications together. So what a resource group allows you to do is just that. Think of it like a collection in .NET or something. I can say all my contacts are here. I'm going to put all my resources that are responsible for this application in one location. Now, the resource group is really just a placeholder for it. It's not real storage or anything. So in order to create one, you have to choose your Azure subscription. In this case, I'm going to choose my sponsor subscription. I'm going to give it a name. I try to give it a name that stands out so I know what's happening with it. And then a region. And the region doesn't really control where things are. It's more for you to know. And I'm going to choose US East 2, even though I am currently in Europe right now. The last time I did this demo in Europe, I didn't have access to any of the Europe resources, which made it really hard. So once I click create, whenever you create an Azure resource, there's always a validation process that happens. You might think that's kind of weird. Why doesn't it validate on the last step? It actually does validate. What this validation step does is kind of does a once over double check to make sure no one else created a resource with that name before you did. So right now that name's reserved. I'm going to hit create, and in a couple of seconds, as you see here, it is created. So I go to that resource group. I see absolutely nothing here because there's nothing there. So the first thing we're going to do is create a SQL Server database. So I'm going to look for SQL Server in here. Now there's several different ways you can do that. You can do it from here. You can do it from up here in the dialog box. You can also come down here and see under categories, but you kind of have to know where things are. So I am going to look for a SQL Server, which is right here. Now you see logical server. That basically creates a separate server because there are virtual servers as well as Azure SQL, which is down here, which provides a hosted instance of it. You can choose either one that's applicable for you. I'm going to choose this because there's basically two databases with this application. So hit create, and I get create a SQL Server, and again, it's going to want to know the sponsorship or the subscription as well as the resource. And because I did a create from within the resource, it automatically pre-populates it, scale it. Then I need to give it a name. This name needs to be unique across .database, .windows, .net. So you see right now it's not. So hopefully I can create a unique enough name. Oh, excuse me. Which I did. So I choose the location and then the kind of authentication you want. This would be applicable to your app. For this demo, everything is using SQL Server authentication, so that's what I'm going to go with. It's going to want a server admin. I'm going to choose SA as the typical, and it doesn't allow you to do that, so I am going to choose my initials or my name and then a password. Now, typically, you would want to generate this from a resource script, so you're not manually doing it. I like to show people how to manually do it so you understand what's involved. Hey, I typed the password twice the same way. And then click review and create. And I'm not going to update that. And then hit create. So now what this is basically doing is going to create a server that will allow me to create some databases on it. Once the deployment is done, I can then create the databases. So this is creating an instance of SQL Server. And it usually takes a couple of seconds, so I'll wait for it to be done, and then we can start off with creating our first database. Well, that's going. Let's show some of the code, and we'll come back to here. So basically, this is our app settings config, which has a catalog connection string, which right now is set locally, and then an identity connection. So we're going to go and change those to a new connection string to match what we have, what we're going to create. Just for the sake of time, I have it copy and pasted on another screen. See, we're going to create on eShop. These are going to be the database names, user ID, password, and don't worry about the password. I end up deleting these resources right after the talk anyway. And then everything else that's required for it. So let's go back and see if that's created. And it's still deploying. It usually takes them a couple of minutes because what's actually happening is behind the scenes. So look at that, it came up just in time. It's creating a Azure SQL Server instance, basically a virtual machine. Let's go and create the first database. So it's going to want to know the basics. So right now I need a database name. So our first one was called eShopOnWeb.catalog. Right? Or is it catalog DB? I always get the two confused. Catalog DB. And then we're going to run it on that server. And it's going to want to know if you want to use Elastic Pool. Elastic Pool is one of the scaling options of Azure that will put it in a pool of servers and basically scale up and scale down as needed for your site. And you indicate what kind of server you want. There are lots of different options. As you start configuring the options, you'll see. The default option here is going to cost me $372.97 a month US dollars. I can go with serverless, which is around $478. If you click down here, there's lots of different options. For the sake of this demo, I'm just going to go with basic. It's the lowest cost at a fixed $4.90. Obviously, you would choose what's right for your instance. And then last step you choose is whether or not this database is locally redundant, zone redundant backup storage. Should probably increase the font here just in case. See how that looks. I'm trying to look on the side to see what the screen looks like, if it's a good size or not. Locally redundant keeps a backup only within the data center that it's in. Zone keeps it within the availability zone. So in this case, US East 1. Geo redundant will keep a copy in at least 2 different continents or 2 different regions. So it'll keep it one in US East and then potentially one in Great Britain or India or somewhere else. So for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to choose local, click create, wait a second, and click create. While that's creating, I'm going to go back and start the next database, which is our identity. So this one is eScale it. So we're going to call this eShop on the web or eShop web. Identity. And then the server sits on the existing server. Type of database. We're going to change the database to be what we had before. Basic. Click apply. Click review and create. And then create. So now I should have my 2 databases in the process of being created or created. So let's take a look here and see what it says. Both of them are deploying. The deployment of database is usually a lot quicker than creating the service. It usually takes 10 to 15 seconds, but this is the longest of all the steps. And we got one of them up and running. Which one do we have? We got both of them up and running now. So both databases are there. So we can check that out and see if it works by running this app. So you see right now I have my app settings pointing to the new database. And as long as I got the names right, we should be good. But in order to check the names, let's show you how you can do that. So I'm going to go to this sample resource. And right over here, there's a server name, so I can copy that out. If I want to copy out the connection strings, I can do connect with, and this will allow me to download the project file for Visual Studio or Azure Data Studio, or I can go here to show database connection strings, and it'll give me an ADO.NET string, Java DBC, and ODBC, PHP, or Go, or I can just copy and paste that. The only difference with this is you have to change the authentication types. Like in this one here, which is what I use, I would have to modify the your password right here. So let's run this app again. Now the first time this app runs, it's basically a demo app, so it's going to seed our database, which means it's going to create our database on the fly every time. That's just the way it works. You know, typically in a real world situation, you're a DBE or database engineer or application engineer would go back out and update it. So here we're getting SQL error, and we are getting the SQL error for a particular reason. So one of the benefits of using Azure SQL is that it is by default security hardened, meaning it's more secure than your typical SQL. They basically block access to this database from everywhere. You have to explicitly call out what apps you want or what IP addresses you want to get this from. So there's a screen right here, this section right here that says set server firewall. We're going to go and set that. And then we're going to choose selected networks. By default, it was selected. And then there's a section here to add your client IP address, 213.239.88.180. That's my current IP address. So I click that, can add to it. I can change the name saying Joe's laptop in Oslo, where I am today. And if I happen to log into this app again, my IP address might change. Another thing we want to do is this exception right here. It says allow Azure services and resources to access this. Later on, when we add our website to it, we're going to want to have access to it. So by checking that, that provides access to this server inside of your Azure resource groups. So sometimes this fails on the first time, you have to save it again. Now if I run this app, I should be able to get access to it. Plus I can open up in Visual Studio and see the database. So if we look here at our code, we should start seeing Entity Framework running commands to create the database and structures. So right now it's working on creating the database, again, because we had migration scripts. Now that it's done, the site is starting up, and we should have, where'd it go? We should have a copy of the database. So right now, this app is pulling from the server in Azure. So let's take off the next step and start to move everything over to the content delivery network. Actually, before we do that, let's make sure we can have access to the database. So here, I'm going to connect to a database in the Server Explorer. Actually, I'd rather do that in the other Server Explorer. Let's minimize you so you're out of the way. And if I go to View, and then choose SQL Server Object Explorer. These are all the local ones, and you see I've done this demo once or twice, so I have a couple of instances of it working. I should be able to connect to these and see I have a database there that's working. Sometimes it takes a second or two. Well, let's go and let's take care of the next step, and we're going to go and create a blob storage. What a blob storage is basically a unit or an entity, a container as they call it, to hold different blobs of data. And the reason why they call it blobs is because it can be anything. It could be a picture, it can be a video file. All it is basically a collection of bytes. Actually, let's stop this. And this way my machine is not going crazy. Now we're going to come back home and then create a new resource. And here we want to choose a storage account. Now we're going to get a list of different storage accounts that are available. We want the Microsoft one, so we're going to choose create storage account. And just like before, it's going to want to know the subscription and then what resource to use it for. So I'm going to choose scale it. We're going to give it a name, eShop on web, scale it. This one also has to be unique within the region. So I already got the region here. Now I have the choice of standard or premium. Premium requires a lot more, it's a lot more expensive because basically you're putting in what's called hot storage, which is near instant runtime availability for it. Standard is what's good for most applications, especially if you're serving up images. You probably won't really notice the difference. Redundancy is the same thing as before. You can have it redundant locally, geo within a zone, or geo zone. For this demo, we're just going to choose local. I'm going to click review. Once the review passes its test, I'm going to click create. Now this should only take 2 or 3 seconds to do. Once it's done, we are going to connect to this from our local machine. So I've already opened up Azure Storage, or at least I thought I did. Yes, there it is. Azure Storage is a free plugin or a free app that you can get from Microsoft. If you're using Visual Studio or JetBrains Writer, you can also do it directly from in there. I'm waiting for this deployment to go because otherwise this step will not happen. So it's there. So now, see if I can zoom in on this a little bit. I think if I do Control ++, yeah, there it goes. So it's a little zoomed in now. If I choose our Azure sponsorship, it's going to click loading. It's loading all the storage accounts I have. This is one I have for a different app, and here's the eShop on web scale it. So I open it up, and I can see any containers with it. Any storage app has block containers, which are basically ways to store data. File shares, which is just that. It's basically a customized version of block containers that allows you to store files, so you can make these files globally available. Queues is a very simple storage queue, first in, first out, that's available, as well as tables, which provides a inexpensive NoSQL-like storage. So we're going to create a new container. You right click and choose create container, give it a name. Give it a name and don't hit enter before I'm done. And in seconds it's there. So now we need to upload files to it. So there's a couple different ways. I can choose upload here and upload individual files. It also supports drag and drop. So I want to take the www root images folder and make that available. So I'm just going to drag it and drop there. And then you'll see here it's queuing a bunch of files. When it's done, all of them are there, and it transferred 24 files. If I click on them here, I can see all 24 of them. So that's cool. Let's take a look at viewing one of the files. So if we right click on, let's say, product 1, images, product, and 1, I can right click and choose properties. This shows me the full URL to get to it, which is right here. So I'm going to copy that and then go to that URL. So let's open up a new tab here and go to URL, hit enter, and I should see an image, except I don't. I get the specified resource does not exist. This goes back to what I was talking about before with when you create a new SQL instance Azure by default is secure and locked down. The same thing with the storage container. So I have to say that I want that one to be accessible. So I'm going to right click here and choose manage access policies, or you can do set public access level. So I choose that, and I'm going to choose public read access for containers and blobs. I can do blobs only, but that doesn't allow people to see others. But for sake of simplicity, we'll choose container and blobs right now. So once that is done, which this green checkbox here indicates, I can come back here, refresh, and I got my image. So now if you notice here, we're getting our image from ease shop on the web, .blob, .core, .windows, CDN, images, blah, blah, blah. So cool. So now we got our images up there. Next step is for us to create a CDN. So we go to this resource here. There's a spot down here where you can create a CDN located right here, or like we've done everything else, we go to home, create resource, CDN, and then we're going to choose front door and CDN profiles, I believe is the new name for it. The name has changed a couple of different times. So I'm going to hit create a front door, and it's going to want to know which ones to create. I believe the simplest one we're going to do is the quick create. And I have to choose where I want it. So I need to scale it. It's in US East. We're going to give it a name, eShop on web. And we're going to do content delivery optimized versus premium. Premium is, again, more expensive, but used for higher end sites. Then we're going to give it an endpoint name, which we're going to still call this eShop on web. Now you notice it creates a really long URL. It's basically, this is a fake name. This is the real URL here, but we'll see that in a second. Your origination type or origin type, we're going to point it at our blob storage. So we're going to choose Azure blobs, and it's going to look within East US, within Scale It, and see if we have one. So it says, oh, you have this one. Is that the one you want to use? I'm going to choose yes. You can choose enable cache. You can choose enable caching and or create what's called a WAF policy, which is basically a protection policy. We're going to do review and create. And then what happens with here, it's going behind the scenes, it's creating a front end to our website that allows us to have an API, even though we didn't enable the API, but it gives us the CDN option, which is now created. So if we go back to our storage account and click on CDN down here, we'll see, I should see that we had a CDN below. Let's double check that our CDN is working by tweaking our one PNG here, and we're going to put it with the new name of it. Now, sometimes it can't find it right away because it doesn't exist. It takes a minute or two for the replication to happen. One thing you can do to enable it, right now the provision happened. You can hit purge cache. You can also do a refresh, which helps load it. Right now it's enabled, so everything should be good. Let's do refresh one more time. Yep. Okay. The other thing to do is to come back here to the eScale it and choose the Azure CDN. And we're going to do eShop on Web. And it already has it, but for some reason it's not seeing it yet. So let's just refresh. Sometimes it takes a minute for it to sync up. What ends up happening with these is it creates a CDN as a content delivery network. So it basically creates servers across the globe and will push the content to it. So in the very beginning, it takes a minute or two for that content to go everywhere. You can also add custom domains to it. So if I wanted to do like cdn.eshop on the web, I can provide that to it. And let's try it one more time. Oh, I know what happened. The URL is different now, so I gotta do this. I'm getting a page not found because it hasn't totally loaded. And I need to reload it. So you come down to provisioned, enabled, custom domain, routes, everything's configured. Yeah, I don't want to purge it. Sometimes this takes a second or two to fully populate. It's sure this is there. There it goes. So now it's populated across, and now we have those out here. So let's go and update the code. So I know this code a little bit, so I can look at the product and see the product is looking for a thing called picture UI. So if we look at the picture UI, it eventually comes back to here, compose picture API, which is going to replace this HTTP catalog base URL to be replaced, which is inside the code, with a catalog settings.catalog base URL. So let's go here and look for that settings, which is right here. So what we're going to do is not that one. We're going to come back and copy this and put that here. And we'll probably want to do HTTPS, and then we should be good. I'm not sure if I need to do a slash or not, so I'm going to add it. Let's hit play. And if I did this correctly, which I didn't, it's going to show images. But in this case, we're going to get a bunch of non-images because we have a incorrect value here. So let's stop this. And the real thing is we wanted to add CDN because that's the storage name. And then we should be good. Nope. I didn't let the other one stop before I started again. All right, totally broke it. Let's shut down this instance of visual of Edge and start it again. Sometimes I'm using the preview Visual Studio and sometimes it kind of loses the connection once there's one debug error. I have to kind of reclose it. So, oh, I know why this one is failing. This is supposed to be commented out. Because this is for Visual Studio or .NET 5, and that's not needed anymore with .NET 6. And is it loading? I don't remember if I hit play or not. Let's stop it and hit play. Oh, there it goes. Just took a minute. And I'm going to load up the tools to show that we are loading it from a CDN now. So we go to Developer Tools and close that. And I'm going to expect this image, and you'll see here that it's coming from eShopWeb-blah-blah-blah.z.azure.net Studio. So now I'm serving up from a CDN. The last step, which should be the quickest step, and I would normally say don't do this at home, but this is a demo, so it's semi-acceptable. As you see in this sample project, there is a GitHub action for deployment, but I'm going to show you how you can deploy straight from Visual Studio. Again, don't do this at home because you want to have a CI/CD pipeline set up with GitHub Actions or something similar. So I'm going to right click here and choose Publish, which I can choose where I want to publish this app. So right now it already has a subscription because I deployed this once before. I don't know if it's going to work because I recently renamed it. So what I'm going to do is delete this one, and then we'll create a new one. So we're going to do a new profile. We're going to publish to Azure, and we want to do an Azure app service. We can do Windows or Linux. I'm just going to choose Windows for now. Then it's going to look to see if I have any. I have currently 2 resources, but I'm not going to use those. I'm going to create one for this. I'm going to give it a name, eShop on Web, resource group. We're going to go with scale it. And you can see eShop on Web is not good, so I'm going to do eShop on Web-scale it. Then a hosting plan. I'm going to click New, choose the type of hosting plan I want, eShop on Web-hosting, and then what kind of database, what kind of server do I want? I'm just going to choose S2 for now. It's one of the faster ones. Click Create. In a couple of seconds, it's going to go and create my Azure or my app service. And then once that's done, I can hit next and finish, and we will be able to access this on the web once it's done creating. While that's creating, I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint deck one more time so you can get the contact information before we open it up to questions. Here's a site that you can go to see what we did on the portal, my website, as well as the eShop on the web sample. Here's my contact information. Take a screenshot of it, and let's see if the thing is done publishing yet. Nope, it's not done creating. This one is usually pretty quick. I don't know what's taking it so long. Maybe because I picked a larger host with it. Oh, there it goes. You just talk about it enough and it will create itself. So I'm going to choose finish. And in a couple of seconds, we have this ready to publish. I'll click publish. Behind the scenes, it's doing a .NET build. Once .NET build works, it consolidates it into a zip file, uploads it to Azure App Service, and then will provide a URL for me. While that's running, I will open it up for any questions that there are.
The public is still figuring out why they haven't done it yet with their own .NET apps, why they haven't moved to Azure, I guess. One question that's probably not a quick answer, but what would you recommend for production health checks, logging, alerting for apps that live on the Azure?
So if we had another 10 more minutes for this talk, normally I would say configure what's called Application Insights, which is part of Azure Monitor, which Visual Studio can do for you almost instantly when you have an app in Azure. If we go back to our portal now, we should see this app created. So if I do, let's look at the resource group here. I should see I have hosting as well as the app service. If I go to the app service, there is an application insights right here that I can enable, and that will give me the ability to do some logging as well as telemetry, health checks, etc., all built in. The reason why I say some logging is because it does basic request, response, error exceptions, but within your app, you can configure it to intercept anything that you do with an iLogger interface, and it can update those messages. Okay, so app is published. Also, you notice it just changed screens, so now I should have the site loading here on eShop on the web. Takes a second because this is the first time it's connecting to the database, first time it's spinning up, so it's going to take a quick second. And there it is. There's our app running, and I can check in the tools and developer options to look to see where our images are coming from, and they are coming from eShop on the web, so I didn't need to deploy those, and it's coming from our database. And within 45 minutes, we took an app that was running locally and moved it up to Azure with little to no hiccups.
That was a very thorough walkthrough, Joey. Thank you for that. For me, there's no excuse to anyone who's running .NET apps not to try it out, because apparently you can do it in 45 minutes and relatively low cost if that's
yes,
necessary.
In some cases you can do it for virtually no cost.
Yeah.
Like the storage is super cheap. You can get up to 10 sites hosted for free on Azure App Service. A lot of what I did was, you can do that whole site the way I configured it for under $10 US a month.
Very promising. Everyone who hasn't tried it yet, first of all, follow Joey, because he has a lot to share on his channels. Thank you so much for being with us today, and
thank you for having me.
See you in a bit.
This is all we got. Remember the revolution in our minds. This is all we got.
Let me out of this life institution. I am angry and I on illusions. Yes, I hate, but it's not a solution. Try my best, but I'm just a human.